In the grand halls of Thornwick Palace, where portraits of ancient kings watched with stern eyes and crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on marble floors, a single document would shatter the peace of the royal household forever. The morning sun filtered through stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the Persian rugs. But inside the king's private study, darkness had already fallen. King Edmund Thornwick III sat behind his mahogany desk, his weathered hands trembling as he held a sealed envelope bearing the royal crest. The investigation was complete. The truth about his wife's family, the truth that would force him to choose between love and duty, between his heart and his crown, lay waiting inside those papers. What he would discover would not only destroy the woman he loved, but would echo through the palace corridors for generations to come. The autumn wind howled through the ancient towers of Thornwick Palace as King Edmund paced his private chambers, the weight of 40 years of rule heavy on his shoulders. At 68, he had weathered political storms, economic crises, and personal tragedies, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The golden morning light that usually brought him comfort now seemed to mock him as it illuminated the damning documents spread across his desk. Queen Isabella sat in her favorite chair by the window, her silver hair catching the light as she worked on her embroidery. She hummed softly, a melody from her childhood in the countryside, completely unaware that her world was about to crumble. Her gentle nature had won the hearts of the people when Edmund married her 15 years ago, despite the controversy surrounding their union. She had been a widow then, a commoner who had captured the king's heart with her kindness and genuine spirit. "My dear," Edmund said, his voice heavy with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Isabella looked up from her needlework, her warm brown eyes sparkling with the same love that had sustained him through the darkest days of his reign. "You seem troubled, Edmund. Is it the Parliament again?" she asked, setting aside her embroidery and rising to move toward him. Her grace was natural, not learned in finishing schools like the nobility, and it had always been one of the things that drew him to her. Edmund's throat tightened. How could he tell her? How could he explain that her beloved brother Marcus, her sister-in-law Sarah, and their children, the family she adored and had brought into the royal circle, were not who they claimed to be? The investigation had begun innocuously enough. A routine security review had uncovered some irregularities in the background checks of extended royal family members. Edmund had expected minor issues, perhaps some distant relative with gambling debts or a forgotten scandal. He never imagined it would lead to this. Marcus Whitmore had presented himself as a successful businessman from the northern provinces when he appeared at Isabella's side during their courtship. He was charming, well-dressed, and seemed genuinely devoted to his sister. Sarah was equally impressive, educated, articulate, and natural with the royal protocols. Their children, Thomas and Eleanor, had become like grandchildren to Edmund and Isabella, filling the palace with laughter and joy. But the truth was far more sinister. The documents before Edmund revealed a carefully constructed web of lies spanning over 2 decades. Marcus Whitmore was actually Marcus Blackwood, a man with ties to organized crime syndicates that had been attempting to infiltrate the royal household for years. His business ventures were fronts for money laundering operations that had cost the kingdom millions in lost tax revenue. Sarah wasn't his wife, but his partner in crime, skilled in forgery and identity theft. Even their children were part of the elaborate deception, trained from childhood to play their roles perfectly. The Royal Intelligence Service had uncovered bank accounts in foreign countries, secret meetings with known criminals, and, most damning of all, evidence that the family had been slowly poisoning the king. Small doses of rare toxins in his food and drink, designed to weaken him gradually and make his eventual death appear natural. Isabella herself was unknowingly the perfect cover, her innocent presence making any suspicion seem impossible. Edmund's hands shook as he picked up a photograph from the file. It showed Marcus in a dark alley, handing a briefcase to a man the intelligence service had been tracking for years, Viktor Kozlov, an international crime boss known for his attempts to destabilize European monarchies. The timestamp showed the meeting had taken place just 3 days ago, while Marcus was supposedly attending a charity gala with Isabella. The king's head of security, General Harrison, had presented the evidence with grim efficiency. "Your Majesty," he had said, his military bearing unable to hide his obvious discomfort. "We have confirmed that the Whitmore family has been using their access to gather intelligence on palace security, royal finances, and your personal health information. We believe they were planning something significant for the upcoming Golden Jubilee celebration." The Golden Jubilee, Edmund's 50th year on the throne was to be the grandest celebration the kingdom had seen in generations. Heads of state from around the world would attend, along with hundreds of thousands of citizens. If Marcus and his family were planning something during that event, the consequences could be catastrophic. Edmund closed his eyes, remembering Isabella's face when she had excitedly told him about the special surprise Marcus was planning for the Jubilee. "He won't tell me what it is," she had said, laughing like a schoolgirl. "But he says it will be something no one will ever forget." The memory now filled Edmund with dread. A soft knock at the door interrupted his dark thoughts. Isabella had returned to her embroidery, but she looked up expectantly. "Come in," Edmund called, his voice steadier than he felt. General Harrison entered, followed by Lord Chancellor Pemberton and the Queen's private secretary, Lady Margaret Ashworth. Their faces were grave, and Edmund knew that Isabella would immediately sense something was wrong. She had an intuitive nature that had served her well as queen, allowing her to connect with people in a way that came naturally to her. "Your Majesties," General Harrison began, but Edmund held up a hand to stop him. "Isabella, my dear, perhaps you might check on the arrangements for tomorrow's garden party?" Edmund suggested gently. "I believe Cook had some questions about the menu." Isabella's eyes moved between the serious faces in the room, and Edmund could see her beginning to understand that something significant was happening. "Of course," she said slowly, gathering her embroidery with deliberate care. She paused at the door, looking back at her husband. "Edmund, whatever it is, we'll face it together, as we always have." After she left, General Harrison spread additional documents across the desk. "Your Majesty, we've discovered more. The Whitmore family has been in contact with tabloid journalists, selling private information about the royal family. Stories about your health, details about Princess Victoria's struggles with anxiety, even information about Prince James's military service. They've been the source behind most of the negative press coverage over the past 2 years." Edmund felt a surge of anger so intense it surprised him. He had endured personal attacks on himself with the stoicism expected of a monarch, but the thought of Isabella's family betraying not just him but his children, Isabella's stepchildren who had welcomed her so warmly, was unforgivable. "There's more, sir," Lord Chancellor Pemberton added quietly. "We've discovered that Mrs. Whitmore, Sarah, has been slowly replacing items in the Queen's personal collection with replicas while selling the originals. Jewelry, artwork, even some of the Queen Mother's personal effects that Her Majesty treasured." The betrayal was complete and devastating. Edmund thought of Isabella showing him a necklace that had belonged to his mother, tears in her eyes as she spoke about how honored she felt to wear it. That necklace, he now knew, had been sold months ago, and Isabella had been wearing a fake without knowing it. "What do you recommend?" Edmund asked, though he already knew what had to be done. General Harrison straightened. "Sir, we need to act immediately. The family should be arrested tonight, before they realize we know. The intelligence suggests they're planning to move forward with their operation within the week." Edmund nodded slowly. He understood the necessity, but his heart broke thinking about Isabella. Her love for her family was genuine and deep. Marcus had walked her down the aisle when they married, since her father had passed years before. Sarah had helped her navigate the complexities of royal protocol in those early days. The children called her Aunt Bella and filled her life with the family connections she had lost when her first husband died. "We'll need to tell the Queen," Lady Margaret said gently. "She'll need to be prepared for what's coming." Edmund looked out the window at the palace gardens, where he could see Isabella walking among the rose bushes, probably heading to the kitchens as he had suggested. In a few hours, her world would be destroyed, and there was nothing he could do to protect her from that pain. "Not yet," he said finally. "Let me tell her myself. After dinner, give her a few more hours of peace." As the others filed out, leaving Edmund alone with his thoughts, he picked up a small silver frame from his desk. It held a photograph from their wedding day, Isabella radiant in her modest wedding dress, Marcus beaming as he prepared to give her away, Sarah holding baby Eleanor, while Thomas stood proudly in his tiny suit. They looked like the perfect family, filled with love and joy. Edmund now knew it had all been a lie. Every smile, every laugh, every moment of apparent affection had been carefully calculated deception. The family that Isabella loved more than anything in the world existed only in her innocent heart. The afternoon passed in a blur of normal royal activities. Edmund attended meetings, signed documents, and maintained the appearance of routine while his heart grew heavier with each passing hour. Isabella joined him for their traditional afternoon tea, chatting about the upcoming garden party and sharing amusing stories about her morning visit to the children's hospital. Her genuine care for others, her natural warmth with everyone from servants to heads of state, made the coming revelation even more painful. As evening approached, and they prepared for a quiet dinner in their private dining room, Edmund knew the time was running out. Soon, very soon, he would have to break Isabella's heart to save the kingdom they both loved. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did that autumn evening, as the shadows grew long across Thornwick Palace, and the truth waited to be revealed. The evening air was thick with tension as servants lit the candles in the private dining room. Isabella had chosen to wear Edmund's favorite dress, a deep blue silk that matched her eyes when she laughed. She moved with unconscious grace around their intimate table, adjusting a flower arrangement here, straightening a napkin there, creating the perfect atmosphere for what she believed would be another peaceful evening together. "Cook has outdone herself tonight," Isabella said, settling into her chair as Edmund held it for her. "The roast lamb smells divine, and she's prepared that chocolate soufflé you love so much." Her smile was radiant, completely trusting, and Edmund felt his heart breaking as he took his own seat across from her. The first course passed in relative normalcy. Isabella chatted about her day, the children at the hospital who had drawn her pictures, the new rose varietals the head gardener wanted to plant, her excitement about the surprise Marcus was planning for the Golden Jubilee. Each mention of her family was like a dagger to Edmund's chest, but he maintained his composure, asking questions and responding appropriately while his mind raced with how to begin. "Edmund," Isabella's voice cut through his thoughts. "You've barely touched your soup. Are you feeling well? You've seemed distant since this morning." Edmund set down his spoon and looked across the table at his wife. In the candlelight, she looked younger than her 53 years, her face open and concerned. How many times had she sat across from him like this, offering comfort and support without question? How many state dinners had she navigated with grace despite her humble origins? How many times had she put aside her own fears and concerns to be the strength he needed? "Isabella," he began, his voice rougher than intended. "There's something we need to discuss." The change in his tone was subtle, but Isabella had been married to him long enough to recognize it immediately. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth, and Edmund saw the exact moment when concern shifted to alarm in her eyes. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her fork carefully. "Edmund, you're frightening me." Edmund reached across the table and took her hand. It was small and warm in his, the simple wedding band he had placed there 15 years ago catching the candlelight. "My darling, I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to remember that whatever happens, my love for you has never wavered." Isabella's face went pale. "Something's happened to Marcus," she whispered. "Or the children." "Oh God, Edmund, tell me." "No," Edmund said quickly, squeezing her hand. "No, they're not hurt. But, Isabella, I've learned some things about your family that are difficult to understand." He had rehearsed this conversation in his mind dozens of times that afternoon, trying to find gentle words for harsh truths. But now, faced with her trusting eyes and growing fear, all his careful preparation seemed inadequate. "I don't understand," Isabella said, her voice small. "What kind of things?" Edmund released her hand and stood, moving to the sideboard where he had placed a single folder. Not the complete intelligence file, which would have overwhelmed her, but a carefully curated selection of the most crucial evidence. "The Royal Intelligence Service has been conducting a routine security review," he began, hating how formal and distant he sounded. "During that review, some irregularities came to light regarding Marcus and his family." Isabella's face was a mask of confusion. "Irregularities? Edmund, you're not making sense. Marcus runs several successful businesses. He's been completely transparent with your security people." "That's what we believed," Edmund said gently, returning to his seat with the folder. "But the investigation revealed that the businesses don't exist, Isabella. Not in any real sense. They're elaborate fronts for illegal activities." The words hung in the air between them like poison. Isabella stared at him for a long moment, then began to shake her head slowly. "No," she said, her voice growing stronger. "No, Edmund, that's impossible. I know my brother. I've known him my entire life. There has to be some mistake." Edmund opened the folder and withdrew a photograph, the one showing Marcus handing the briefcase to Viktor Kozlov. He placed it gently on the table between them. "This photograph was taken 3 days ago, while Marcus told you he was at the Children's Cancer Foundation Gala." Isabella picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. Edmund watched as recognition dawned on her face. First of Marcus, then of the location, then of the unmistakable nature of what was happening in the image. I don't understand, she whispered. Who is this other man? What is Marcus giving him? The man's name is Viktor Kozlov. He's an international criminal with connections to organizations that have been attempting to infiltrate European monarchies for years. We believe Marcus has been passing him information about palace security, royal finances, and Edmund's voice caught. And my personal health information. Isabella dropped the photograph as if it had burned her. You're saying my brother is a criminal? That he's been spying on us? Her voice was rising, and Edmund could see the disbelief warring with the evidence before her eyes. There's more, my darling. Edmund reached for another document. Sarah isn't who she claims to be either. Her real name is Sarah Blackwood, and she has a history of identity theft and forgery. The children. Stop. Isabella's voice cut through the air like a whip. She stood so abruptly that her chair nearly fell over. Stop this right now. I won't listen to any more lies about my family. Edmund rose as well, moving around the table toward her, but she backed away from him. Isabella, please. I know this is difficult to accept, but difficult? Isabella's voice cracked. You're accusing my family of being criminals and spies. You're telling me that the children I love, who call me Aunt Bella and draw me pictures and run to me when they're hurt, are part of some elaborate deception. How could you even think such things? The pain in her voice was devastating, but Edmund pressed on. He had to make her understand the danger they were all in. The intelligence service believes they were planning something significant for the Golden Jubilee, something that could threaten not just the monarchy, but the safety of everyone attending. Isabella laughed, but it was a sound devoid of humor. The Golden Jubilee? The celebration Marcus has been so excited about? The surprise he's been planning for weeks? She shook her head violently. Edmund, listen to yourself. You're talking about my brother, the man who walked me down the aisle when we married. The man who held me when I cried after Robert died. The man who welcomed you into our family with open arms when the entire nobility was whispering about the king marrying beneath his station. Each word was true, and each one made Edmund's task harder. Marcus had indeed been all those things to Isabella, or at least he had appeared to be. The deception was so complete, so thoroughly convincing, that even now, with evidence spread before them, it seemed impossible to accept. I know how this sounds, Edmund said softly. I know how much your family means to you. But, Isabella, I need you to look at this evidence. Really look at it. He spread more documents across the table, bank records showing accounts and false names, correspondence with known criminals, even medical records showing the gradual introduction of toxins into his system that corresponded exactly with his increasing fatigue over the past year. Isabella stared at the papers, her face cycling through emotions too rapidly for Edmund to track. Confusion, denial, anger, and something that might have been recognition all flickered across her features. The medical records, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. You've been getting sick. Small doses, Edmund confirmed. Nothing that would kill quickly or obviously, but enough to weaken me gradually. The doctors couldn't find a source because they were looking for natural causes. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth. But I've been preparing your tea every morning for months. I've been bringing you lunch in your study. If someone was poisoning you, the implication hung unspoken in the air. We don't believe you knew, Edmund said quickly. The investigation suggests they were introducing the substances through other means, perhaps during family dinners, or through gifts of food or drink. Isabella sank back into her chair, her face ashen. The special honey Marcus brought back from his business trip to Switzerland, she said slowly. You've been using it in your tea every morning. And Sarah's homemade preserves that she always insists we serve at breakfast. She looked up at Edmund with dawning horror. They used me. They used my love for them to hurt you. Edmund knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his. Isabella, you are completely innocent in this. You could never have known. But I should have. Isabella's voice broke completely now, and tears began streaming down her face. I should have seen something, questioned something. I'm your wife, Edmund. I'm supposed to protect you just as much as you protect me. My darling, no. Isabella pulled her hands free and stood again, this time moving to the window that overlooked the palace gardens. 20 years, Edmund. They've been part of my life for 20 years. When Robert died, and I was alone and frightened, Marcus took care of everything. When I met you and felt so out of place in this world, Sarah helped me learn protocol and etiquette. When we married and I worried about not being able to give you children, Thomas and Eleanor became like the grandchildren we never had. Edmund approached her carefully. I know how much they mean to you. Isabella turned to face him, her eyes blazing through her tears. Do you? Do you really understand what you're asking me to accept? You're telling me that every family dinner, every holiday celebration, every moment of love and laughter we've shared has been a lie. Every time Marcus hugged me, every time Sarah asked about my day, every time those children ran into my arms, it was all calculated deception. The raw pain in her voice nearly brought Edmund to his knees. This was exactly what he had feared, exactly why he had dreaded this moment since General Harrison had first presented him with the evidence. Isabella's capacity for love was both her greatest strength and her most vulnerable weakness. There's something else, Edmund said quietly, knowing he had to tell her everything now. They've been selling information to tabloid journalists. Stories about our private life, about the children's personal struggles, about your own difficulties adjusting to royal life in the early years. Isabella's face crumpled. The stories about Princess Victoria's anxiety attacks, the speculation about Prince James's military service, the photographs of me crying at my mother's grave last year. When Edmund nodded, she closed her eyes. I told Sarah about all of those things in confidence. When Victoria was struggling, I needed someone to talk to. When I was worried about James, I needed comfort. When I missed my mother so desperately I could barely function, I know, Edmund said. You needed family. And they exploited that need. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening gardens. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, colder than Edmund had ever heard it. Where are they now? At their estate, under surveillance. But they don't know we're aware of their activities yet. And you plan to arrest them. Tonight. We can't wait any longer, Isabella. The Golden Jubilee is in 4 days, and we don't know what they're planning. Isabella nodded slowly, still not turning from the window. I want to see them first. Isabella, that's not safe. I want to see them first, she repeated, her voice carrying a note of royal authority that Edmund rarely heard from her. I want to look them in the eye and hear them lie to me one more time. I need to know. I need to know if there was ever anything real between us. Edmund understood. After 15 years of marriage, he could read the complex emotions playing across her face even in profile. She needed closure, needed to confront the people who had stolen not just information and money, but her very ability to trust her own judgment about the people she loved. Very well, he said finally. But it will be under guard, and we'll have everything in place to arrest them immediately afterward. Isabella turned from the window at last, and Edmund was struck by how much she had changed in the space of an hour. The innocent joy that had always been her hallmark was gone, replaced by something harder and more brittle. The woman who had entered the dining room humming softly was gone forever. I need to call them, she said with forced calm. I'll tell them we'd like them to come for dinner tomorrow night. One last family gathering before the Golden Jubilee celebrations begin. As Isabella moved toward the telephone, Edmund remained by the window, looking out at the gardens where he could see palace guards taking their evening positions. Tomorrow night, the carefully constructed lies that had shaped their lives for years would finally be exposed. But, as he watched his wife's reflection in the glass, he wondered if the truth would ultimately prove more destructive than the deception had ever been. The evening air grew colder as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and Edmund couldn't shake the feeling that the tempest approaching Thornwick Palace would be far more devastating than any weather could ever be. The morning dawned gray and heavy, matching the somber mood that had settled over the palace like a burial shroud. Isabella had barely slept, and when Edmund found her at dawn, she was standing at their bedroom window, still wearing the same blue dress from the night before, watching the mist rise from the palace grounds. They said yes, she said without turning around. Marcus was delighted by the invitation. He said he was looking forward to sharing his surprise with us. Her voice was flat, emotionless, as if she had used up all her feelings the night before. Edmund approached carefully, unsure how to comfort a woman whose entire understanding of her family had been shattered in a single evening. Isabella, I keep thinking about little things, she continued, her breath fogging the glass. The way Sarah always seemed to know just a little too much about palace business. The way Marcus would steer conversations toward your health, your schedule, your private meetings. Thomas asking such specific questions about the security systems during his tours of the palace. I thought he was just curious, an intelligent child interested in how things worked. She finally turned to face him, and Edmund was shocked by the change in her appearance. Her eyes, usually bright with warmth and life, were dull and hollow. She looked older, as if the truth had aged her a decade overnight. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Not suspected, known." Edmund's throat tightened. "The first concrete evidence came to light a week ago. But, Isabella, I didn't want to believe it any more than you did. I kept hoping there would be some other explanation." "A week." Isabella nodded slowly. "A week of watching me talk about them, plan for them, worry about Marcus's health because he seemed tired lately. A week of me telling you how excited I was about his surprise for the Jubilee." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose his tiredness was from stress about whatever they're planning to do to us." The formal breakfast service proceeded as if nothing had changed. Isabella sat at her usual place, mechanically cutting her food into precise pieces, but eating nothing. She responded to the servants' greetings with her typical grace, asked Cook about the menu for the evening's dinner party, and reviewed the final arrangements for the children's choir that would perform during the Golden Jubilee. To anyone watching, she appeared to be the same beloved queen she had always been. But Edmund could see the performance it required. Every smile was calculated, every gesture carefully controlled. The natural warmth that had made her the people's darling was gone, replaced by the kind of royal mask that Isabella had never needed before. After breakfast, she disappeared into her private study, claiming she needed to review correspondence. Edmund found her there an hour later, sitting at her delicate writing desk, staring at a photograph in an ornate silver frame. It showed the entire extended family at last year's Christmas celebration. Isabella laughing as young Eleanor showed her a drawing, Marcus and Edmund engaged in animated conversation by the fireplace, Sarah helping Thomas with a complex puzzle, everyone looking happy and natural and completely genuine. "I've been studying their faces," Isabella said without looking up, "searching for some sign that I missed, some indication that they were lying. But, Edmund, they look so real, so genuinely happy to be with us. How is that possible?" "They're very skilled at what they do," Edmund said gently. "According to the intelligence reports, they've been practicing this kind of deception for years. The love they showed you, perhaps parts of it were real, even if the circumstances weren't." Isabella set down the photograph and looked at him with something that might have been pity. "You're trying to make me feel better. But, Edmund, if any part of their feelings had been real, they couldn't have done what they did. You don't poison someone you love, even a little bit. You don't sell stories that hurt people you care about. You don't use children as weapons against people who trust you." She was right, and they both knew it. The thoroughness of the deception, the calculated cruelty of using Isabella's love for family against her, spoke to a level of manipulation that left no room for genuine affection. A soft knock interrupted them. Lady Margaret entered with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesty, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there are several matters that require your attention before this evening." Isabella straightened in her chair, transforming instantly back into the composed queen. "Of course. What do we need to address?" "The security arrangements for tonight's dinner require your approval. General Harrison has prepared several contingencies that need your authorization." Edmund saw Isabella's hands clench briefly in her lap before she smoothed them out. "I see. And what contingencies are those?" Lady Margaret glanced nervously between the king and queen. "The general has positioned additional security throughout the palace, including in the private dining room. There will be specialized personnel present during the meal, disguised as serving staff. And he's requested that you both wear small communication devices, in case immediate assistance becomes necessary." The reality of what they were planning began to sink in. This wouldn't just be a dinner party. It would be a carefully orchestrated trap, with Isabella as the unwitting bait to keep her family calm and unsuspecting until the moment of their arrest. "Will they be armed?" Isabella asked quietly. "The specialized personnel?" Lady Margaret's silence was answer enough. Isabella stood and moved to the window again, a gesture that was becoming habitual. "How many people know the truth about tonight?" "The minimum necessary, Your Majesty. General Harrison, Lord Chancellor Pemberton, myself, the head of the Royal Intelligence Service, and a small team of trusted security personnel." "And afterwards?" "After they're arrested, and the truth comes out, there will need to be a public statement," Lady Margaret admitted. "The charges against them are too serious to keep private, and there will likely be a trial." Isabella's shoulders tensed. "So the entire kingdom will know that I was fool enough to bring criminals into the heart of the royal family. They'll know that I nearly got my husband killed because I couldn't see through my own brother's lies." "Isabella," Edmund began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "It's the truth, isn't it? The tabloids will have a field day. The woman who married above her station and brought crime into the palace. the queen who couldn't protect her own husband from her family's greed. She turned back to them, and Edmund was disturbed by the cold calculation in her eyes. "What will you tell the people?" Lady Margaret looked to Edmund before answering. "The official statement will emphasize that you were completely innocent of any wrongdoing, that you were as much a victim of their deception as anyone. But that won't matter, will it?" Isabella's voice was steady, matter-of-fact. "The story will be about the queen who brought criminals into the palace, about how the monarchy was weakened because the king married for love instead of duty." Edmund felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "Isabella, you are not responsible for their choices. You are not responsible for their crimes. Are not." She moved back to her desk, picking up the Christmas photograph again. "I vouched for them, Edmund. I brought them into your life, into your children's lives. I convinced you to trust them because I trusted them. Every security breach, every piece of stolen information, every dose of poison, it all happened because I insisted they were good people who deserved your confidence." The guilt in her voice was devastating, but Edmund could see something else building underneath it, a cold anger that was perhaps more dangerous than her grief. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparations. Isabella met with the head chef to finalize the menu, insisting on all of Marcus's favorite dishes and Sarah's preferred wine. She arranged for flowers from her private garden to be used in the centerpiece, chose the china pattern that the children loved because it had tiny painted birds on the edges, and personally wrote place cards in her elegant handwriting. Edmund watched her orchestrate every detail with meticulous care, creating what would appear to be a perfect family gathering, while knowing it was actually an elaborate trap. The transformation from the broken woman of the morning to this coldly efficient queen was both impressive and deeply unsettling. "You don't have to do this," he told her as they prepared to dress for dinner. "We could handle the arrest without involving you directly." Isabella paused in brushing her hair, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "Yes, I do have to do this. I need to look them in the eye and hear them lie to me one more time. I need to see if I can spot the deception now that I know to look for it. And Edmund," her voice took on a harder edge, "I need them to know that I know. Before they're taken away, I want them to understand that their lies didn't work forever." As the sun set over Thornwick Palace, casting long shadows across the grounds, the final preparations were completed. Hidden cameras were positioned to record everything. Security personnel took their disguised positions, and the communication devices were tested and activated. In just a few hours, one of the most elaborate deceptions in royal history would finally be exposed. Isabella stood before her dressing room mirror, adjusting the simple pearl necklace that had been her mother's. In her elegant black dress with her hair styled in a classic chignon, she looked every inch the queen. But Edmund could see the steel beneath the silk, the cold determination that had replaced her natural warmth. "Are you ready?" he asked, offering her his arm. Isabella took one last look at herself in the mirror, and when she turned to face him, the woman looking back was someone Edmund barely recognized. The loving, trusting Isabella was gone, perhaps forever. In her place stood a queen who had learned the hardest lesson of all, that love could be weaponized, that trust could be deadly, and that sometimes the people closest to your heart were the ones most capable of destroying you. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady as stone. As they walked together toward the private dining room where her family waited, Edmund couldn't help but feel that they were walking toward something far more final than a dinner party. They were walking toward the end of Isabella's innocence, the death of her ability to love without suspicion, and the birth of a harder, more guarded woman who would never again trust so completely. The palace corridors had never seemed longer, and, with each step, Edmund wondered if the price of protecting the kingdom would ultimately prove too high for the woman he loved to bear. The private dining room had been transformed into a perfect stage for deception. Soft candlelight flickered across the polished mahogany table, illuminating the delicate china and gleaming silverware that Isabella had personally selected. The autumn flowers from her garden created a centerpiece that spoke of family warmth and seasonal celebration, while hidden cameras captured every angle, and disguised security personnel moved silently in the background, posing as attentive servers. Marcus arrived first, embracing Isabella with the same warm affection he had shown for 15 years. "My dear sister," he said, his voice rich with apparent love, "you look radiant as always. This dinner was such a wonderful idea, especially with the Golden Jubilee so close. I can hardly contain my excitement about the surprise." Edmund watched the embrace carefully, searching for some sign of falseness, some indication that this man was not who he claimed to be. But Marcus's performance was flawless. The way he held Isabella, the genuine smile on his face, the slight moisture in his eyes as he looked at her. If Edmund hadn't seen the intelligence photographs himself, he would never have suspected anything was wrong. Sarah followed moments later, elegant in a deep green dress that complemented her auburn hair. "Your Majesty," she said to Edmund with a perfect curtsy before turning to Isabella with open arms. "Bella, darling, thank you so much for including us tonight. The palace staff tells me you've planned Marcus's favorite menu. You always remember such thoughtful details." The children burst in with characteristic energy. Thomas, now 14, and growing into the height that would mark his adulthood, bounded over to Edmund with a grin. "Uncle Edmund, I've been studying the palace's architectural history for a school project. Did you know that the original foundation stones were laid using a technique that's completely unique to this region?" Eleanor, 12, and still young enough to show uninhibited affection, launched herself at Isabella with complete trust. "Aunt Bella, I finished the painting I was working on. It's a portrait of you and Uncle Edmund for the Golden Jubilee. Papa says it might be displayed with the other celebration artwork." Edmund felt sick watching Isabella's face as she hugged the child. The genuine love in the Queen's eyes was heartbreaking, knowing as he did that this would be the last time she could hold Eleanor without the shadow of betrayal between them. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," Isabella managed, her voice only slightly strained. "I'd love to see it after dinner." As they settled around the table, the conversation flowed with the easy rhythm of family intimacy. Marcus regaled them with stories from his recent business travels, describing amusing encounters with clients and the challenges of expanding his operations into new markets. His tales were detailed and convincing, peppered with specific names and locations that the intelligence service had already verified were completely fabricated. Sarah shared news from her volunteer work with the local historical society, discussing their efforts to preserve documents from the region's medieval period. She spoke with obvious knowledge and passion about illuminated manuscripts and ancient binding techniques, displaying an expertise that Edmund now realized had been carefully cultivated to support her false identity. The children chattered about school, friends, and their excitement about the upcoming Jubilee celebrations. Thomas had been selected to carry one of the ceremonial banners in the parade, while Eleanor was part of the children's choir that would sing during the cathedral service. Their pride and anticipation seemed completely genuine, and Edmund found himself wondering if they truly understood their role in their parents' deception, or if they too were victims of a manipulation that had shaped their entire lives. "Uncle Edmund, you seem tired," Eleanor observed with the directness of childhood. "Have you been working too hard preparing for the Jubilee? Papa says planning such a big celebration must be exhausting." The innocent comment hit Edmund like a physical blow. His fatigue, which they now knew was caused by systematic poisoning, had been noted and discussed by the very people responsible for it. The casual way Eleanor mentioned her father's observation made it clear that his deteriorating health had been a topic of family conversation. "I have been feeling a bit run down lately," Edmund admitted, watching Marcus's reaction carefully. "Though I'm sure it's just the usual stress of preparation for such a significant event." Marcus nodded sympathetically. Of course, the Golden Jubilee only happens once in a reign. The weight of making it perfect must be enormous. He reached for the bottle of wine he had brought as a gift. "This is a special vintage from that Swiss vineyard I told you about. I thought it might help you relax tonight." Edmund accepted the glass with steady hands, though internally he recoiled. The casual way Marcus offered potentially poisoned wine while discussing Edmund's health showed a level of calculated cruelty that was almost incomprehensible. "Speaking of the Jubilee," Sarah said, leaning forward with apparent excitement, "Marcus has been so secretive about his surprise. He won't tell even me what he's planning, though he's been making mysterious phone calls and disappearing for hours at a time." Isabella's fork paused briefly on its way to her mouth. "Phone calls?" she asked with careful casualness. Marcus laughed, the sound warm and familial. "Business associates helping with the arrangements. I wanted everything to be perfect, so I've been consulting with experts in various fields. You'll understand everything on the day, I promise." Edmund knew those business associates were likely Viktor Kozlov and his criminal network, finalizing whatever devastating surprise they had planned for the Jubilee. The thought that thousands of innocent people would be gathering to celebrate, while completely unaware of the danger, made his stomach clench. As dinner progressed, Edmund found himself studying each family member with new eyes, searching for cracks in their performance. But the more he watched, the more disturbed he became by the complete lack of any obvious deception. These people weren't nervous or suspicious. They weren't making mistakes or giving themselves away through careless comments. They were perfect in their roles, displaying exactly the right mixture of love, concern, excitement, and casual familiarity that a real family would show. The conversation turned to memories, shared holidays, funny incidents from the children's younger years, touching moments from Isabella and Edmund's wedding. Marcus reminisced about walking Isabella down the aisle, his voice thick with emotion as he described his pride in seeing his sister become queen. Sarah shared stories about helping Isabella navigate royal protocol in those early days, laughing about the amusing mistakes and social confusion that had marked Isabella's transition to royal life. "Do you remember," Sarah said to Isabella, "that first state dinner when you got completely lost trying to find the ladies' retiring room? I found you in a storage closet, practically in tears because you thought you'd embarrass Edmund by disappearing in the middle of the meal." Isabella smiled at the memory, but Edmund could see the pain in her eyes. "You rescued me that night," she said quietly, "just like you always did when I felt overwhelmed by all of this." "Family takes care of family," Marcus said firmly. "That's what we do for each other. No matter what challenges arise, we face them together." The irony of his words, given what Edmund now knew about their true intentions, was staggering. This man who spoke so eloquently about family loyalty had been systematically betraying and endangering the sister he claimed to love. As the meal drew toward its close, Edmund noticed subtle changes in the room's atmosphere. The disguised security personnel were positioning themselves more strategically, and he could see General Harrison's reflection in one of the mirrors, stationed just outside the dining room doors. The moment of truth was approaching. Isabella excused herself to check on dessert preparations, a transparent excuse that allowed her a few moments to compose herself before the final act. When she returned, her face was a mask of royal composure, but Edmund could see the steel in her eyes. "Before we have dessert," Isabella announced, "there's something Edmund and I need to discuss with all of you." The family looked up expectantly, their faces showing nothing but mild curiosity. If they suspected anything, they gave no indication. "It concerns some irregularities that have come to light during a routine security review," Edmund continued, his voice steady and formal. "Irregularities that involve all of you." Marcus's expression shifted slightly, becoming more alert, but not yet alarmed. "What kind of irregularities? If there's some problem with our background checks or security clearances, I'm sure we can straighten it out quickly." "I'm afraid it's not that simple," Isabella said, her voice carrying a coldness that none of them had heard before. "The irregularities involve falsified identities, criminal associations, and—" her voice caught almost imperceptibly, "and the systematic poisoning of my husband." The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke, nobody even seemed to breathe. Then, Marcus began to laugh, a sound so genuine and confused that for a second, Edmund wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. "Poisoning," Marcus said, still chuckling. "Edmund, Isabella, what on earth are you talking about? This sounds like something out of a melodrama." Sarah's face showed perfect bewilderment. "I don't understand. Who would poison the king? And what does that have to do with us?" But Edmund was watching the children, and what he saw there chilled him to the bone. Thomas and Eleanor were not looking confused or frightened. They were looking at their parents with a kind of resigned acceptance, as if they had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. "You know," Isabella said, her eyes fixed on Thomas. "Don't you, Thomas? You've always known what your parents really are." The 14-year-old straightened in his chair, and suddenly, he looked much older than his years. When he spoke, his voice had lost all trace of childish innocence. "We've known since we were old enough to understand." "Did you really think children could live in a house where such elaborate lies were being constructed without becoming aware of it?" Eleanor nodded sadly. "We love you, Aunt Bella. We really do. But we also knew that eventually, this day would come." Isabella's composure cracked for the first time, and Edmund saw tears begin to form in her eyes. The children's confession was somehow worse than anything else. The revelation that even their affection, even their apparent innocence, had been shadowed by knowledge of their parents' crimes. Marcus's laughter had stopped, and Sarah's expression of confusion was sliding away like a discarded mask. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The loving family members were disappearing, replaced by something colder and more calculating. "Well," Marcus said finally, his voice now completely different, harder, more businesslike. "I suppose congratulations are in order. How long have you known?" "Long enough," Edmund replied. Long enough to prevent whatever you were planning for the Golden Jubilee. Marcus smiled, but it was nothing like the warm, familial expression they had known. This smile was sharp and dangerous. Are you certain about that, Your Majesty? Are you absolutely certain that you've prevented anything at all? The confidence in his voice sent a chill down Edmund's spine. Even now, with their deception exposed and their arrest imminent, Marcus seemed unworried, almost amused by the situation. Isabella leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. I need to know one thing, Marcus. Was any of it real? Any part of your love for me, your relationship with the children, your integration into our family, was any of it genuine? Marcus studied her face for a long moment, and, for just an instant, Edmund thought he saw something that might have been regret flicker across his features. But, when he answered, his voice was matter-of-fact. Real affection would have made the job impossible, Isabella. Emotional attachment is a weakness that professionals can't afford. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. She fell back in her chair, the last of her hopes that some part of their relationship had been authentic finally dying. Edmund stood, his own anger finally overcoming his composure. General Harrison, he called, knowing the general was listening through the communication devices. Please proceed with the arrests. The dining room doors burst open, and armed security personnel flooded in. But, as they moved to surround the family, Marcus raised a hand with casual confidence. Before you do anything irreversible, he said calmly, you might want to know that the Golden Jubilee isn't the target. It never was. The target is this room, this moment, this conversation. And the timer has already been set. As his words sank in, Edmund realized with growing horror that they had walked into a trap far more sophisticated than they had ever imagined. The dinner party, the arrests, even their discovery of the family's true nature, it had all been planned and orchestrated from the beginning. And somewhere in the palace, a timer was counting down to an explosion that would eliminate not just the royal family, but everyone who knew the truth about the Whitmore deception. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. And, in the terrible silence that followed, Edmund could hear the rapid beating of his own heart. Marcus sat calmly in his chair, his hands folded peacefully before him, while armed guards surrounded the table, but hesitated to move closer. You're lying, General Harrison said as he entered the room, his weapon trained on Marcus. Our sweeps found no explosive devices in the palace. Marcus smiled with genuine amusement. Your sweeps looked for traditional explosives, General. But what you didn't consider is that the most effective weapons are often the ones hiding in plain sight. He gestured casually around the elegant dining room. Tell me, has anyone thought to test the beautiful flowers Isabella arranged from her private garden? Or perhaps the special honey I brought back from Switzerland, which has been flavoring the king's tea every morning? Or the lovely wine I selected specifically for tonight's celebration? Edmund felt the room spinning around him. The systematic poisoning hadn't been just about weakening him gradually. It had been about introducing substances that could be activated or enhanced by other chemicals, turning his own body into a weapon against himself and anyone near him. The children, Isabella whispered, her face going white. Eleanor, Thomas, if there's going to be an explosion, the children will be fine, Sarah said, speaking for the first time since the masks had come off. Her voice was coolly professional now, stripped of all maternal warmth. They've been taking antidotes for weeks, building up resistance to the various compounds we've been introducing into the palace environment. Eleanor looked at Isabella with what appeared to be genuine sadness. We really do love you, Aunt Bella. But we also love our parents, and we understand what they're trying to accomplish. Thomas nodded solemnly. The monarchy is an outdated institution that concentrates too much power in the hands of people who were simply born into privilege. Our parents are part of a larger movement to democratize European governments. Edmund stared at the 14-year-old boy he had watched grow up, seeing him now as a stranger who spoke of revolution with the casual confidence of an adult. How long, he asked hoarsely. How long have you been planning this? 20 years, Marcus replied matter-of-factly. Since before Isabella's first marriage, actually. Robert's death was convenient, but not entirely coincidental. We needed access to the royal family, and a grieving widow with a charming brother was the perfect opening. Isabella made a sound that was half sob, half scream. The revelation that her first husband's death, which had devastated her and left her alone and vulnerable, had been orchestrated as part of this elaborate deception was more than she could bear. However, Marcus continued, checking his watch with casual precision. We have approximately 7 minutes before the chemical reaction reaches critical mass. I suggest you use that time to evacuate the immediate area if you wish to minimize casualties among the staff. General Harrison was already speaking rapidly into his radio, ordering immediate evacuation of the palace's central wings. But Edmund could see the mathematical impossibility of the situation. 7 minutes wasn't enough time to evacuate a building the size of Thornwick Palace, especially not while ensuring the safety of the hundreds of staff members who lived and worked within its walls. What do you want? Edmund demanded. There has to be something you want, or you wouldn't be giving us this warning. Marcus exchanged a glance with Sarah, and Edmund saw something pass between them, a communication so subtle and practiced that it spoke of years of partnership in deception and crime. What we want, Sarah said slowly, is for you to understand that this isn't personal. It's political. The European monarchies have outlived their usefulness, and the concentration of wealth and power they represent is harmful to true democratic progress. You're terrorists, Isabella said, her voice stronger now, anger beginning to overcome her shock. You're murderers who used my love for you to get close to innocent people. We're revolutionaries, Thomas corrected with adolescent earnestness. And revolution always requires sacrifice from people who don't understand the necessity of change. Edmund found himself thinking with crystal clarity despite the chaos around him. 7 minutes. The chemical reaction Marcus had described, probably involving the various substances they had been introducing into the palace environment over months or years, would create an explosion large enough to destroy the central palace and everyone in it. The Golden Jubilee celebration would become a memorial service, and the shock of the royal family's death would destabilize the government exactly as Marcus and his associates intended. But there was something Marcus had said, something about the timer being set when the conversation began. If the chemical reaction was already in progress, if it was truly irreversible, then why were they sitting here talking instead of fleeing? Why give any warning at all? You need something from us, Edmund realized suddenly. The reaction isn't automatic, is it? There's something you need us to do, some final component that requires our cooperation. Marcus's smile faltered slightly, and Edmund knew he had guessed correctly. The final catalyst requires the king's blood, Eleanor said quietly, her young voice matter-of-fact about something that should have been horrifying. The poisons you've been ingesting have changed your blood chemistry. A small sample, introduced to the reaction chamber, will complete the process. And if we refuse? Isabella asked. Then, the reaction proceeds more slowly, Sarah admitted. The explosion will still occur, but it will take approximately 45 minutes instead of 7. Still not enough time for a complete evacuation, but enough to significantly reduce casualties. Edmund understood the choice they were being offered. Cooperate and ensure maximum destruction and chaos, or refuse and save some lives while still allowing the royal family to be eliminated and the government destabilized. There's a third option, he said slowly. The idea forming in his mind was desperate, possibly suicidal, but it was the only path he could see that didn't end in catastrophe for hundreds of innocent people. Edmund, Isabella said, recognizing the tone in his voice. What are you thinking? The reaction requires my blood because of the chemical changes caused by months of poisoning, he said, working through the logic aloud. But what if the blood chemistry could be changed again, quickly, in a way that would neutralize rather than complete the reaction? Marcus's expression sharpened with interest rather than alarm. What exactly are you proposing? Edmund turned to General Harrison. Contact the royal physician immediately. Tell him I need every antidote, every neutralizing agent, every chemical countermeasure he can provide for heavy metal poisoning, chemical manipulation of blood chemistry, and any other toxins that might have been administered over an extended period. Sir, the dosages required would be potentially fatal. Yes, Edmund interrupted. But if I can neutralize the chemical changes in my blood before providing the sample, their reaction might fail completely. Isabella grabbed his arm. Edmund, you can't. The risk is less than the certainty of what happens if we do nothing, he said gently. Isabella, if this works, if I can neutralize their chemical reaction, then we save not just the palace staff, but everyone attending the Jubilee celebrations. If it doesn't work, he touched her face tenderly. Then, at least we tried. Marcus was studying Edmund with something that might have been respect. You would risk your own life to prevent an explosion that might fail anyway? I would risk my life to protect the people who trust me to keep them safe, Edmund replied. That's what kingship means, not privilege and power, but responsibility and sacrifice. The royal physician arrived with remarkable speed, his medical bag bulging with hastily gathered emergency medications. Dr. Pemberton had served the royal family for over 20 years, and his face was grim as he listened to Edmund's request. Your Majesty, the combination of antidotes you're describing would put enormous stress on your heart, your liver, your kidneys, every major organ system. Even if you survive the immediate effects, there could be permanent damage. But it might work? Edmund pressed. It might change my blood chemistry enough to disrupt their reaction? Dr. Pemberton looked at Marcus and Sarah, his expression filled with disgust. If these people have been systematically introducing the compounds I think they have, then, yes, massive doses of chelating agents and chemical neutralizers might reverse the process. But, sir, the cure might very well kill you. Edmund looked around the room at the faces surrounding him. General Harrison was speaking rapidly into his radio, coordinating evacuation efforts that they all knew couldn't be completed in time. The disguised security personnel maintained their positions around Marcus's family, though their weapons seemed inadequate against the threat of chemical explosion. Isabella was staring at him with a mixture of love and terror that broke his heart. How long do we have? Edmund asked Marcus. Marcus checked his watch again. 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Edmund held out his arm to Dr. Pemberton. Then, we'd better begin. The physician's hands shook slightly as he prepared the first injection, but his voice was steady. This will hurt, sir. The antidotes will cause nausea, dizziness, probably severe pain as your body tries to process and eliminate the accumulated toxins. Do it, Edmund said simply. As the first needle pierced his skin, Edmund felt the burning sensation of powerful chemicals entering his bloodstream. The room seemed to tilt and spin around him, and he had to grip the edge of the table to remain upright. 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Marcus announced, his voice now showing the first signs of tension. The second injection brought waves of nausea so intense that Edmund doubled over, his body rebelling against the chemical assault he was subjecting it to. But he forced himself to remain conscious, knowing that if he lost awareness now, any chance of disrupting the reaction would be lost. Isabella took his free hand, her own tears falling freely now. I love you, she whispered. Whatever happens, remember that I love you. 1 minute and 15 seconds, Marcus said. We need the blood sample now, or the window will close. Dr. Pemberton drew blood quickly, his hands steadier now that the moment of action had arrived. The vial of dark red liquid looked innocuous, hardly capable of determining the fate of hundreds of lives. Where? Edmund gasped, fighting to stay conscious as the antidotes continued their brutal work on his poisoned system. Sarah pointed to a small device that had been concealed beneath the flower arrangement Isabella had so carefully designed. It looked like nothing more than an ornate jewelry box, but Edmund could see the small opening where the blood sample was meant to be introduced. With tremendous effort, Edmund stood and walked the few steps to the centerpiece. His vision was blurring, and he could feel his heart racing irregularly, but he forced himself to focus on the simple task of pouring the blood into the device. 30 seconds, Marcus said quietly. Edmund upended the vial, watching his own blood disappear into the mechanism. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, there was a soft electronic beep, followed by a low humming sound that seemed to come from within the walls themselves. 10 seconds, Marcus whispered. The humming grew louder, then, suddenly, stopped. In the absolute silence that followed, Edmund collapsed back into his chair, his body finally surrendering to the chemical trauma he had inflicted upon it. Marcus stared at the silent device, his face showing the first genuine emotion he had displayed all evening, disappointment. Remarkable, he said softly. The reaction has completely failed. Your blood chemistry was altered enough to neutralize rather than catalyze the process. Is it over? Isabella asked, her voice barely audible. It's over, General Harrison confirmed, listening to reports in his earpiece. The chemical signature we've been tracking throughout the palace is dissipating. There will be no explosion. Edmund tried to speak, but found his voice had abandoned him. The antidotes were still working through his system, and Dr. Pemberton was already preparing additional medications to help his body cope with the massive chemical shock. You'll need immediate medical attention, the physician said urgently. The next 24 hours will be critical, but I believe you'll survive. There may be some lasting effects, but you've prevented a catastrophe. As General Harrison and his team moved to secure Marcus's family, Edmund found himself looking at Isabella. She was holding his hand tightly, her face still wet with tears, but There was something new in her expression, a kind of strength that hadn't been there before. "They're going to try to destroy you in the press," Isabella said quietly, speaking to him, but loud enough for Marcus to hear. "They're going to claim you were weak, that you were manipulated, that the monarchy failed because you couldn't protect your own family." Edmund managed a weak smile. "Let them try. The people will know the truth, that we were willing to risk everything to protect them." Marcus was being handcuffed, but he looked back at them with something that might have been respect. "You surprised me, Your Majesty. I didn't think you had it in you to make that kind of sacrifice." "That's why you failed," Isabella said, her voice steady and strong. "You never understood what real love looks like. You thought it was weakness to be exploited, but it's actually the strongest force in the world." As the family was led away, Edmund noticed that the children looked back at Isabella one last time. Eleanor's face was sad, and Thomas appeared confused, as if he was beginning to question everything he had been taught about revolution and sacrifice. The palace slowly returned to normal over the following hours. The evacuation was called off, the security teams stood down, and the preparations for the Golden Jubilee continued. But Edmund knew that nothing would ever truly be the same. Isabella's innocence was gone forever, replaced by a harder wisdom that would make her a different kind of queen. As dawn broke over Thornwick Palace, Edmund and Isabella sat together in their private sitting room, watching the sun rise over the gardens where it had all begun. Edmund was weak from the medical ordeal, but alive. Isabella was quiet, processing the complete destruction of everything she had believed about her family. "The Golden Jubilee will still happen," Isabella said finally. "The people deserve their celebration, and we won't let terrorists steal that from them." "And after?" Edmund asked. "After the celebrations are over and the immediate crisis has passed, what then?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her hand still holding his. "Then we rebuild. We create a monarchy that's stronger because it faced the worst kind of betrayal and survived. We show the people that love and duty are more powerful than deception and greed." She looked at him with eyes that were sadder but also fiercer than they had been before. "And we never, ever let anyone use our capacity for love as a weapon against us again." Outside their window, the palace grounds were stirring to life. Staff members were beginning their daily routines, gardeners were tending to the roses, and in just a few days, thousands of people would gather to celebrate 50 years of Edmund's reign. The kingdom had survived, the monarchy had endured, and the royal couple who had nearly lost everything had found a deeper strength in the ashes of their broken trust. The crown's shadow had fallen across Thornwick Palace, but, in the end, love had proven more enduring than deception, and duty more powerful than betrayal. As Edmund and Isabella faced the future together, they carried with them the hard-won knowledge that true strength came not from the power of the crown, but from the willingness to sacrifice everything to protect those who depended on them. The Golden Jubilee would indeed be unforgettable, not for the reasons Marcus had planned, but because it would mark the moment when the monarchy proved that it could face its darkest hour and emerge not weakened, but transformed.